Thank you, Susie. So our keynote today, I will give you a little bit of information. Dr. Elsa Cárdenas-Hagan. She's a bilingual speech-language pathologist and a certified academic language therapist with a doctorate in curriculum and instruction. She's the director of the Valley Speech, Language, and Learning Center in Brownsville. She's an associate research professor for the Texas Institute for Measurement, Evaluation, and Statistics at the University of Houston. Dr. Cárdenas-Hagan's research interests include the development of early reading assessments for Spanish-speaking students and the development of reading interventions for bilingual students. In addition, she is the co-founder of Brownsville's READS, R-E-A-D-S, a nonprofit organization to promote literacy. She also currently serves as vice president of the International Dyslexia Association and is the chairperson of the Texas State Dyslexia Advisory Board. So I want to introduce Dr. Elsa Cárdenas-Hagan. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today, and thank you. As you can hear, Susie Coltrus talk about Texas, and so I say we're in good hands for all this wonderful work, and that we never are finished with our work. There's always so much to be done, and we can only learn from each other by being collaborative. That's how we're going to get the job done. And of course, we need our state agencies, and we think about, well, right now we've got standards and all these standards that we have to meet, and sometimes it's like, oh no, another thing we have to do. But often these standards are in place to help guide us to know what to do. And hearing about this wonderful news, I did not know about these vignettes. I think that is just terrific for the state of Texas to do such wonderful work, as are other states. And so I understand we have people from many other states and some from different countries. So today what I'd like to talk to you about is I have 1 hour, and so I was teasing, Linda Cavazos over here saying, you cut half my slides. And so I really don't like when my slides are, she goes, we'll put it in the handout. We'll put it in the handout. And so I'm just always, I love to talk, and I over talk, but I know that I only have a little bit of time, and so they want me to get to the meat of what I have to say. And so a lot of it went into a handout, but I'm still going to talk a little bit about that and squeeze it in. So I was just like complaining a little bit of like, oh goodness, so much was cut. But we have a little bit of time. But what we're going to be doing today, you see in front of you the agenda. And so I will talk to you, Susie Coltrus talked to you about the demographics of English learners here in the state of Texas. And we'll talk a bit about, what does it look like across the United States. And we want to talk about how we expect that literacy to develop. And as you heard, I was a speech-language pathologist, and so we can't leave out language. Language being, just at the core of literacy. And, the same centers in the brain for language are reading centers. And so if you don't have the language skills that you need, then you're not going to have those high levels of literacy skills to be able, what is it? What's the ultimate goal of literacy? And the ultimate goal of literacy is indeed to have high levels of comprehension and be able to think, critically and in depth about the text that's in front of us. And so I want to talk about not only that literacy development and incorporating language with literacy, but I want to talk about the instructional considerations, what we should be doing in our general education classrooms, and what we should be doing. Susie Coltrus mentions the ELPS, those English language proficiency standards. What should every teacher, it's not like how many English learners will I have, and will I ever have an English language learner in my classroom? No. It's how many will I have, and am I prepared to teach these students and meet their needs and differentiate my instruction. And the bulk of my work has been done in the area of really looking at interventions for children who struggle, and especially Spanish-speaking English learners
who struggle with learning to read. What should we be doing? And these intervention studies, so we've been doing those it's now getting close to 20 years. And so it's like, my family, they're always your strongest critics. They're like, well, if you've been doing all this work, how come we haven't seen on those NATE reports, the nation's report card, I thought you were doing this great work. And I go, well, now if you look this last time, we were making some gains, but it takes a lot, to change the world, as you mentioned. And so, your strongest critics are your family members. So we'll be talking a bit about the intervention studies, but also talking about an oracy and vocabulary development for English learners and the importance of that. And I'll be talking about how we embedded into intervention these short, kind of mini lessons and things that we needed to be doing to address their oracy and their vocabulary development, and then we'll be closing. And I do understand that you will have the opportunity to post some questions, and so I hope to also get to those, and then if not, we can certainly, you have my email, and we can get to those and post it through the Regional Educational Laboratory. And I just want to thank the REL for inviting me and for the great work that they do. And without Linda Cavazos, I said thank you for all the support through this process. Very good. So you heard Susie Coltress talk about, we're getting close to 1 million here, right? But when we look across the United States, we see that there are, in our public schools, 400 different home languages other than English in this population of students. However, 80% of those students speak Spanish in their home. And so our intervention studies have focused on Spanish-speaking English learners. And our studies have been sponsored by the United States Department of Education and the Institute for Education Sciences and the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. And so the second language, interesting enough, is Vietnamese, and it's about 1%, and all the others are less than 1%. But when you look at, it doesn't mean to diminish that. No, absolutely not. We have, huge school districts here represented. Basically, get us with the Houston School District with, so many English learners from all over. But what we know is if we can learn about what to do with the majority of them, can we also do some smaller studies on these other population of students and what are the best practices? And the ultimate goal is that we, for other states, you are working on meeting your Common Core state standards, and here in our state, we have our Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills here in Texas. But the whole idea is we have to be college and career ready. And when we look at what does the future hold for, the United States and for states like Texas and California and New York, is that the workforce will be, as we look in the future, here in Texas, our state demographers will say by 2040, 60% of those workers in the state of Texas will be Hispanics. And so we are preparing tomorrow's workforce. And so as we look at that, it's not such a simple issue at hand. Developing language, although it's a natural process, we know that it's not a simple task. And we know that students are often required to quickly learn, we want them to learn quickly those conversational skills, and then, quickly learn English literacy, and make sure that we do listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And oftentimes we think, oh, they're doing great, and then we find, oof, fourth grade slump, right? Because what? We didn't get away from the basic communication skills, that basic ability to this higher level. So we want deep, deep pockets of knowledge there, and we want them to have the opportunity. And so, many, the hope for tomorrow are these, programs where we could be working on 2 languages. These children, their brains, they're sponges. And when you look at neuroscience development, you look at when is it best to learn another language? When you're young.
Your brains are pre-wired really to speak all the languages of the world. The work of Dr. Patricia Kuhl has clearly demonstrated that, and so we want our students to have these opportunities early, but not just to leave at a minimal level, but to get to that academic level so we would be able to have great jobs in the future. And so there's much that we can do to really facilitate biliteracy. And as we're looking in classrooms, we should, and thinking about the students that we serve, we should really look at, first we need to know, well, what is their ability in their native language? What are those proficiency levels? And how can I best, as an educator, how can I best use what they already have to not only further develop their native language, but that second language instruction, and take it not only from listening and speaking, but to reading and writing, right? And what's beautiful about the majority of these English learners is that they speak Spanish as their first language. And as we look at Spanish, right, we see that English, when we look at English, we look at these word parts that are available. Well, these word parts and much of English comes from Latin, right? 80% of Spanish comes from Latin, and when we look at English, 60% are these like really, really meaningful words. These long words in English, they're Latin-based words, right? And they're related to things like, the court systems, the law, and we have these beautiful words that are often very common words in our native language, but high-level words in this second language. So it's such a benefit to look at alphabetic languages like Spanish and English and Russian. And these alphabetic languages, they use these symbols to represent sounds, right? And when we look at this, we see, wow, look at what is the same. And we always say, our research has pointed, there isn't any research that disputes the native language serves as the foundation for that second language development, right? But here's yes, we agree with that. But we have to be mindful to be explicit and systematic in using that resource of the native language. It doesn't happen automatically, and I don't have to speak that native language to make those connections happen in my classroom. As an educator, it is my responsibility to figure out what would be great, what connections can I help these students make. And so much, and I've given you the resources of the research. And so Maria Carlo and her group found that unless you systematically and explicitly talk about these points, it's not going to happen by itself. And so we can be more strategic in our classrooms and how we address these language and literacy and first language and second language. And so when we talk about alphabetic languages, some of them are very transparent, right? They follow like Spanish. We have this symbol in Spanish. We have 5 vowels, and those vowel sounds never change. That's a transparent language. Here's the symbol, and matches to the sound. But then we look at English, and we say English is opaque, right? It's confusing because English we borrowed from everybody. And so when we look at English, it's like several ways one letter can be represented, and several ways a sound can be represented by letters. And I give the example, as you look here on this slide, of the sound E. And so in English, that can be like an EE or an EI or an EA, like in the word read, right? And this letter A, for example, in English can be A or can be A, or it can even say like in banana. And to English learners, that doesn't make sense, and maybe not even to monolinguals, right, monolingual speakers. Why does it say at the end? But this is what makes the language opaque. However, as opaque as we think English is, we can actually find patterns about when do we say these sounds and when do we produce it this way. And our students can learn these patterns, right? But first, the teachers, we have to know the patterns in order to explicitly teach it. And so as we look at this, we see that there are some beginning skills as we look at these early skills of reading. We see that these early skills, such as phonological awareness, that ability to process the sounds and manipulate the sounds, and phonics, that ability to note that here are these sounds and symbols and here are these relationships, and this is how you decode and read. We know that phonological awareness and phonics are important skills, and they are important skills for developing those early foundational skills of reading, those word recognition skills. And we see that it is positively correlated across many languages, right? And they're similar. And so as we look at this, what we know is that we need to capitalize on that similarity, right? And we need to help our English learners. And our English learners need this early opportunity that's explicit, that's intensive. And we want to build those phonological awareness skills, to build those decoding skills. And we should not have more students that are English language learners with issues in not being able to process the sounds and decode and read the words. We should not have more. In fact, it should be about equal numbers of native and non-native English speakers encountering these difficulties with word decoding, right? And what we see in the early years, actually in our studies, as we have developed tests for the state of Texas, we see when we're doing these reliability and validity studies that, in fact, the Spanish speakers take off very quickly, and they begin to read these complex words, not only in their native language of Spanish, but can handle that in English. Why? Because they're very used to reading words with many syllables, as the Spanish language has very few monosyllabic words. And when we look at that, we see they really take off in those early skills of being able to decode, but where we need to also focus is on these skills of addressing their vocabulary, their ability to read fluently, to free up their minds, to be able to understand the text. That is at the ultimate goal. So these 5 core areas of literacy instruction, as identified by the National Literacy Panel, right, for language, minority, youth, and children. So what we see here is that phonological awareness being a component. And for many educators, way back when, that was like news, that, oh my gosh, we have to work on that, even with our Spanish speakers. I mean, why would that be? We never had to do that before. Why are you asking us to do that now? Well, we want to, our students to really be able to process those individual sounds, as we know that those can be related to future difficulties with being able to decode and read, that graphophonemic knowledge, being able to look at that symbol and put that sound to the symbol. And that, you have to have those skills to be able to read fluently. And certainly your vocabulary skills. You know, it's one thing to be able to read any word. It's another thing to be able to understand that word. And, you know, that is very much some of the issues that we're working through as we look at how can we get their vocabulary development on level and equal to those of their monolingual English-speaking peers. Now, the ultimate goal is to have comprehension. So my message here is the same 5 areas that we know are important for English learners, for non-English learners, the monolinguals, are also important for our English learners. All right? So I'll give you just a moment to think about that. So if I just said that those 5 components are so necessary, we know that we see that these skills tend to develop quite nicely amongst this population of students. And but when they have difficulty, we can find them very early in life. And often it's the kindergarten teachers saying, you know, this student isn't, recognizing letters and not able to put those sounds together. You know, that alphabetic principle is more difficult. And so these students then need that extra instruction and support. And one of the things that we fail to do, we used to think, you can't, this is what you often heard, that you can't teach English literacy, right, until they have fully developed their oral language skills. And that's a no-no. Knowing, having that structure can actually help me develop my English language. We must continue to work. It takes years and years to get to that academic level of English. But knowing that structure can be another resource. And so we should not be delaying, right, that English literacy. We can do it simultaneously and not sequentially. All right? So this is something very, very important. So we can start that English literacy. And so what we want to be able to do is I want to share with you what we know about this, and I want to share in our studies what we have found. That, so you'll see right there where it says Spanish TA, and that stands for Spanish Phonological Awareness. When we looked at students that were Spanish-speaking students, we found that their ability to process and how they did on some of the tests that we developed, how they processed those sounds made a difference and was highly correlated with their Spanish word reading, and that was 0.74. In the research world, just think about it. If I had 1.0, that would be a perfect correlation. But 0.74 is a high correlation there. So telling us that this relationship between phonological awareness and reading is a strong relationship. We found the same thing in English, that your English phonological awareness skills is also very much related to that ability to be able to read English words. But what we did is looked cross-linguistically. And what we found was those students that had excellent Spanish phonological awareness skills, that correlated very nicely to their English phonological awareness skills. And that correlation is a 0.92. I am 0.08 off from it being a perfect correlation, meaning that when I have that ability and I have the opportunity for that ability and I do well, then I'm going to do well in English, right? And then we're looking at it Spanish, your Spanish reading skills also correlate nicely to this alphabetic language of English, meaning that that relationship there is also 0.74. So you're seeing this relationship both as we look at phonological awareness and reading within languages and across languages. Now something else that's very important is that as we look at your Spanish phonological awareness skills, we see that that's correlated with English word reading abilities. And looking at it the other way, looking at your English phonological awareness skills, that's correlated the other way. How about me having to read in Spanish? And that correlates the other way as well, looking at that relationship being 0.65. Now, so the good news is if I have these skills in my native language, then I'm off to a great journey in English literacy. But the opposite is true as well. If I'm very weak in these skills in my native language, if I have poor phonological awareness skills in my native language, then I'm going to have this great same kinds of difficulty when I'm trying to read in English, and also an alphabetic language. Now, where I get suspicious is if the child did not have any of these difficulties in their native language, and we're finding that they're having these troubles in the English language. And then I say, you know what, that's dysphagia, all right? And it's not any other kind of dys except for that, right? So we need to make sure that in looking across languages, it gives us so much information. So we see this relationship within languages and across languages, and by the way, it appears to be bi-directional, going both ways, going from Spanish to English, but also, anybody interested, going from English to Spanish. Let me let you take just a moment to reflect upon, you know, what I just said. And by the way, that represents a couple of years of my life on that, all wrapped up in one slide. I'm pretty darn sorry there. But let you give a minute to think about that strong message that I'm giving you. So let's look at the connections from Spanish to English. As I've shown you, I have demonstrated to you these relationships. So now let's think about, so we said, and you heard, that, Spanish is one of the most common languages of our English learners. And lots of English is derived from Spanish. So we say 60% of the English language is derived from Latin. 15% is derived from Greek. So we learn Latin and Greek word parts, well, we're off to a great start. And when we look at words, we call these words cognates. And these are words that are similar in how they look and their spellings across the languages, and also similar in meanings. Of course, we also have to be careful about things that we call false cognates, and we actually have dictionaries of words that appear to look the same, but they mean totally different, right? Like pie in English and pie in Spanish. So one is foot for Spanish, right? And then pie, the delicious pie we're going to have after this meeting, right? So as we look here, we see that what a beautiful thing to have so many words be words that are related across these two languages for our English learners. And we also see, so that's going to help my vocabulary, certainly. And, I think about when I first had the opportunity to do this as, myself looking at, trying to develop the second language. And my first experience was at the university when I took a course called Greek and Latin Roots for medical terminology, and it opened up my eyes. And then when you took that GRE, I was like, oh, I got a lot smarter. But no, I didn't get any smarter. I just had the opportunity to learn about, wow, the English language, look where it comes from, and look what, my eyes were open. And so can't we do this work with our young children? And the answer is yes, we can. And so we want to provide those opportunities. And in Spanish, I'm saying 29 sounds, but I'm including those sounds that are like diphthong sounds, like oi and right, and a, and 44 sounds in English, right? So English has more sounds. However, when we look across Spanish and English, we see that, there are 19 letter sound correlations that I call complete transfers, meaning that here's this letter, here's this sound that it makes. It's exactly the same in Spanish as it is in English, right? And so we have those opportunities for 19 letter sound correlations. And what happens is we don't give the children the credit that they know this. We go back and we teach as if they're a monolingual English speaker and that they have to start from the beginning. And that's a lot of time wasted when they already have this extra resource. And that extra resource is the language and the knowledge they bring about from their native language to help that second language literacy development. And we have 6 letter sounds that I call, what do I mean by partial transfers? By partial transfers, I mean that they're almost the same, but there's a slight difference in the sound. So I can give an example like the letter Z, right, in English is a sound that's a voice sound that your vocal cords vibrate. And in Spanish, we often will say the unvoiced version. So those are very similar. So there's 6 letter sound correlations that are what I term partial correlations. And so that would be like the J, the letter J, right, in Spanish and English. We have those letters, but the sound changes. All right? So as we look at these connections and these opportunities, what we're going to do is look at how can we explicitly teach them these connections. And what we found in our research is that we could actually capitalize the amount of time it took for them to really understand that English literacy and how English literacy works. So as I pointed out before, the teachers should have knowledge of these transfer points. And I don't have to speak the language. I've even looked in the language of Vietnamese to look at, oh, look, the word carrot in Vietnamese, it's a cognate. It's practically the same, or coffee. And I've looked across the languages so that we can, also address this not only with the Spanish speakers, but, there's also cognates in Vietnamese. And even in Swahili, their word for telephone is like something like the word sounds similar to dial, right? And so these abilities to look cross-linguistically will help, but first we have to know. And when we are working with the students, and especially, we're interventionists, we need to be very careful about how we design our interventions and take into consideration what does that classroom language of instruction model look like, and how can I match my intervention more closely to the instruction that they're receiving in their classroom. And that's not always an easy thing to do. It'd be easy for us just to take, just what I have and get to doing it. But we should be mindful of what is the language of instruction model and what is our model for the intervention. And are we meeting the needs in this intervention that we're doing to help the students succeed in the classroom, right? And when we look at the response to intervention model, we actually have, the teachers providing this, and in some cases, some school districts have others providing the intervention. So there needs to be great communication amongst the instructor and the person providing the intervention to make sure we're meeting the needs, and that we just didn't say, well, we're going to do this without any consultation about what the needs are going to be of the student. All right? So as we look across these languages, we see that there are some unique English elements, and it's up to us to provide that additional instruction on the elements that are unique to English and not part of the student's native language, right? And so it's our job to provide that explicit instruction to the uniqueness, how similar they are and how different, what will be new. And as a speech language pathologist, I'm here to tell you the importance of how we produce our language, both in the native language and second language, and to make sure that we are equipped to be great models, because the students need great models, right, as they listen to us and as we speak to them, and then also for reading and writing. So we must be expert models, and as we see these students that have difficulty producing the sounds, and you're not probably going to get them, eligible to, have a speech pathologist work with them, but we should be mindful to help them get to the precision of words and the precision of the sounds, because how I hear it and how I say it is going to be how I read and write it. And so at that very basic level, we need to make sure that they're producing it absolutely correctly and not let them get by with a close approximation. We need precision. And that's going to be very, very important for them as they continue to develop their second language literacy skills. All right? So how do we instruct? What does it look like? What should you be doing as you design in your classroom instruction for these students? So here's where I'm asking you to shift your paradigm just a bit. I'm asking you to really think about the students, to know them well, to know what they know from their native language and how we can capitalize upon that. So I'm asking you to consider in your classrooms to first capitalize. This is how I would design my instruction if I were in a classroom today for an English learner who must learn English literacy. And so I would capitalize first on what was familiar. My instruction would be addressing first, look here, this is what is exactly the same from your first language to this second language of English. And then I address what is partially the same. And remember, I talked to you about those partial overlaps, like I gave you the example, like the letter Z or the letter J or the letter H. That's what's almost the same, but not quite.
And then I have to teach what's new, what is absolutely new. And so in English, for us, what's new are, like those letters that you have, those TH letters that make two sounds, both the voiced and the voiceless. And I need to know, well, when am I going to know when to say what? Or when you have those R-controlled vowels, and or, and you need to teach me, well, when do I say or for O-R, and when do I say Oh, well, no one ever taught me. When it was unaccented O-R, that's when I said like in doctor. That was unaccented, so now I can say But I have to say or when it's in the accented syllable, like in fork. But no one ever taught me that. And so I might go around saying doctor, right, instead of doctor. So learning about what's familiar, learning about the patterns, learning those 6-syllable types of English. When I figured out, and I didn't do that until I was an adult, like you mean to tell me that there's 6 syllables in English, and I never knew that until I was an adult, and that tells me when I can say the certain vowel sounds. Wow, that opened up there once again, the science of English literacy. It opened up a new world for me, right? And then I have to really focus on those new sounds of the English language and really purposefully work on listening to them, speaking, and reading and writing with them. All right? So I'd like for you to think about some questions for discussion in your table groups and the chat pods. I gave you some hints. I shouldn't have given you all the answers. What English phonemes, what other English phonemes that I didn't give you as an example, do not exist in Spanish? And why would it be important to teach these phonemes? I gave you big hints. Let me give you a few minutes to think about that. Well, great. We had some very great discussions here at our table. And so we have a few comments. One of the questions that we received, Linda, would you like to read the question? Yes. One of the questions from the virtual participants was, what instruments should be used for oral language and vocabulary proficiency for students aged 3.5 to 5.5 that speak Spanish at home and whose parents are partially literate? All right, and so as a speech language pathologist, what we always do is we do a word book, just picture books, right? And we tell the story and have the students retell the story because it gives you a lot of information about their listening skills, their speaking skills, their articulation skills. And then I'm also looking at, well, what are the milestones that we would anticipate for a little 3-year-old to have? And I'm happy to share those. Those were what got cut on my slides, but just teasing Linda here. But anyway, I had those milestones so that you would know what's normal and what we consider not normal, right? And so, but typically for a little 3-year-old, you would anticipate that they would be able to put and string 3 words together. We need to be able to see them, and then by the time they're 4, 4 and a half, we would expect them to be able to string 4 words together, so kind of that general rule. In our world, we do what's called language sampling, and so we get a mean length of their utterances, and from there we can tell what grammatical structures they have, how many words, what is the mean length of their utterances. Is it typically that they speak in 1-word utterances or 2-word or 3 words, and how do they do? We have ways of analyzing story retell, but that's time consuming, but I like taking my time because I like going very much in depth. We also use in our, we do the language sampling, but we also have standardized tests that we use as previously mentioned. We do use the Woodcock-Munoz battery. In addition, the Texas Education Agency also has a list of approved tests on the website that Susie Coulters was describing to you. I also have provided a resource, the Center for Applied Linguistics, the CAL. That's the very first resource under organizations, and on there you may also gather more information amongst this subject. So I hope that answers part of your question. Okay, next question, and this is a long one. If you have a fourth grader who has yet to develop fluency in native language, has difficulty with some phonemic awareness, and has been referred for RTI, and has been found to have dyslexia, should we then try to encourage English literacy development?
All right, so this kind of goes back to what I was describing to you, is keeping the child in mind. And so you want to gather a lot of data about that child who's now in fourth grade. So I want to know, first of all, what has been the opportunity for instruction, and has that been consistent, the language of instruction model? Because often what we find is that there's been a lot of inconsistencies, maybe in, their opportunity. But remember what I was saying about when you design your intervention, you want to be mindful of what's also being required in class. And so what we did in some of our cases is, we were still working. So I had interventions that were, bilingual, biliterate interventions, whereby we saw the student, like in this case you're mentioning, still working on Spanish fluency. So our intervention, so I'll just give you an example. The Mondays and Tuesdays, we were working on Spanish comprehension, Spanish fluency, Spanish vocabulary, and then the other 3 days we were working on these English literacy skills, taking into mind what they already knew to do that. So we actually had an intervention that was a bilingual, biliterate intervention to more match the level of the child and match that instruction of the classroom. So the questions for discussion in our table groups were, what English phonemes do not exist in Spanish? So give me, some of my folks here, can you all give me some examples? Let me ask this table over here. What sounds in English do not exist in Spanish? Do you have any idea? Your long vowel sounds. But there's some connections to be made, right? So like if we have long A, so in English we have the A, like in cake, right? Or the A, like in apron, right? But we also have, or A, like in sail, AI. But we also have in Spanish that sound, A. But we spell it with what letters? E-I. E-I and E-Y. So there's a connection that we can make. I already know your long A sound. I have that in my language. But in my language, I use E-I and E-Y. So that would be a great opportunity for making a connection. Right? Yes, ma'am.
One that is difficult.
One that is difficult.
It is TH.
The
One
TH.
is voice, and the other one is voiceless.
Yeah, the TH can be a voice sound, and I'm putting my tongue between my teeth and saying, ooh, and then I put my tongue between my teeth and I say, right?
We'll keep going.
So, but do they actually have that voice TH sound in their language? The letter D of their language, whenever it's in the medial position between two vowels, like in the word for finger in Spanish, dedo, that D is actually your English TH voice sound. So English TH voice, I have that sound in my native language of Spanish. I just didn't know I had it, right? And our teachers need to know. So why would it be important to teach these?
So our virtual participants responded that for listening, comprehension, pronunciation, and learning the alphabetic principle, decoding and spelling.
Very good. So what do you think? That sounds like a very comprehensive answer. What did our audience here today think? Would you agree? I think you're getting a bunch of nods back there. Very good.
So also from our virtual participants, they responded, or they're asking actually, do you use bilingual measures for fluency and vocabulary knowledge? And how do you treat code switching? Do you have an answer to that?
Well, we actually tried to develop for the state of Texas this vocabulary test. And on the vocabulary test that we were developing, we asked in the Spanish language, can you tell us, like foods? And the children started saying chicken nugget and pizza. And I was like, oh gosh. And then it got so complicated we gave up. So, because it is. But here the answer is they had a concept and they had a label. It just wasn't the label I was looking for to make my test really easy and easy to score, right? And so we're still kind of like how, and so actually the bilingual verbal abilities test actually lets you and gives credit for those students that actually answer in either language. I was just remembering another little vocabulary one that just thinking about, we give the expressive one-word picture vocabulary test and expressive and receptive one-word picture vocabulary test. A lot of people use the PPVT, those are like standardized measures. And of course, I always do my language sampling and my story retelling because it just gives you so much in-depth information. So I think that's good. Let's go on. All right, so I think we can move on, and thank you for I do see Dwayne over there. The triphthong in my first name does not occur in Spanish. Nobody can say Dwayne, so they say Dwayne. But here I'm going to give you something that you can do. Let's everyone say his name. Dwayne.
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 Now, my Spanish speakers, is there any connection that you could make? Dwayne. Can anybody here think of a connection?
E-Y.
Say that again?
U-E, like sueño.
Right. Like U-E, wet, wet, right? And it does sound like that. Or I can even go, I can even go from gua to gua. All right? Gua, gua. That would be close to. So I might try a few of those. And I never give up on that. So Dwayne, we want you then to say your name correctly. Thank you. All right. So why do we teach these unfamiliar and grapheme? We teach them because that unfamiliarity, we want to make sure that for our students, we're actually working on those unfamiliar phonemes, and we want to familiarize our students with the patterns that don't exist in their native language but do in English. And so helping with those specific sounds and the sound placement in words for these differ for different languages, and we want them to, and you're right, I saw there on our folks participating, as you were saying, is that like we first have to make sure that they can discriminate and process those sounds. That's the first step. And often with spelling disabilities, we see it's because they can't process those sounds very well. So we have to make sure that they can process the sounds very, very well in order to be able to read, write, and spell them. And as we look at the intervention studies for English learners, we've had the opportunity to work. These interventions were sponsored by U.S. Department of Education, as I mentioned earlier, Institute for Education Sciences, and National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. And Dr. Sharon Vaughn and also Dr. Sylvia Lenore Thompson, Dr. Francis, a whole team of individuals, Dr. Carlson. So it's a collaboration between the University of Texas at Austin, the University of Houston, and the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston, where we worked on preventing reading difficulties among Spanish-speaking students. And these interventions were really designed, and once again, we really designed them to meet the needs of the students, whether they were in classrooms that focused primarily on English, primarily in Spanish, depending on the student and where they were in their proficiency levels. But what I want to talk about is the lesson cycle and the daily lessons that we did for preventing these reading difficulties among Spanish-speaking students. And we learned some lessons just right off the bat about as we're instructing, we need to really be mindful of what's going on in the classroom to meet the needs. And so the interventions were designed both in English and in Spanish. So what was different was that we really embedded language support during these literacy interventions, and we found that to be very, very important. And as we embedded these, not only did we embed language support, we also embedded read aloud into our intervention so that we could work on their oracy, oral language, expressive language. We could work on their vocabulary while also at the same time working on their literacy skills. These studies continue today for the Institute for Education Sciences as we are now doing the scale-up studies. In other words, I'm going to talk to you about how we found that we were, our interventions were effective both in English and Spanish, and we followed these children, we did follow-up and followed them up longitudinally. But now the studies are more dedicated to what we call the scale-up studies. How can we scale this up across other states and really work with large urban districts, right, and suburban districts, but also see how can we make sure that other states and other students from across this United States will be as successful as the students were here in Texas. And so the instructional design for these studies, all the while, as I mentioned to you, this is what's unlike other intervention studies. How is it that we just think intervention, and we're only working on literacy? No, we have to work on language and literacy. And so these interventions really embedded and worked on vocabulary, developing concept knowledge. We began early on working on phonemic awareness, but then that moved into encoding, right? Really working on spelling. And then working, we didn't right away work on the letter sounds, but very quickly after. And once they get those letter sounds, then we could work on their word reading and then reading connected text. But all the while working on comprehension. Even before they were able to read text, we were working on their listening comprehension skills. So that's what's important. Often we think about intervention as just going to be this, reading. But no, we have to work on their listening, their speaking, their reading, and then, of course, moving into then writing. And so these interventions, I provided you a resource. And so the Institute for Education Sciences has what's called the IES Practice Guide. And so these interventions are written up on best practices for interventions among English learners for the United States. And then in addition to that, I gave you the more recent one on English learners, looking at upper elementary and middle school, looking at their interventions. But the good news is that we see that no matter the language and no matter the intervention, the language of intervention, we still saw statistically significant differences both in the Spanish interventions and in the English interventions. So we can be successful with these students, and we can match what they're doing in their classrooms and also match their proficiency levels and be very mindful of that. And so, these students were able to do very, very well in their, phonological awareness and their phonics. We saw their fluency improve. And then, of course, their oral language improved, but we still needed even more to get them at the very highest levels of oral language. And so what did we learn during all of these years of working with at-risk readers? We learned that we wanted to follow the model lead test, right? So anything we were asking these students to do, we would explicitly model for it, we would guide them, and then we would have them do it independently. You all already know this. It's like, I do, we do, you do, right? So that's model lead test. The other beautiful part about it is we used lots of repetitive language in our and we had lots of instructional routines. So the students knew exactly what was expected of them, and these routines really helped the students. very much to do well. So, really making sure that they felt confident in what we were asking them to do. Every single day, the students would not only learn a new concept, but they would have opportunities to read, to say, to read, to write, and to practice these new skills. All the while, we were working on oral language skills with their literacy skills. The beautiful thing that we also learned in working with school districts is we needed time. And so we would meet with the teachers like once a month to really time to reflect, time to really review, some of these challenging cases, and lots of modeling and mentoring. That's what we have provided. Now in the scale-up studies, what we have done is we have kind of lessened the time that we provide to dialogue with the teachers and hoping to build capacity at the school district level. And so we'll see how those studies, pan out as they're able to get at the same type of results that we received. Clarification. What is connected text reading? So read the question. All right. So one of the questions is, what is connected text reading? What I mean is reading like little passages, right? So connected text would be reading, sentences and paragraphs. That's what I mean by connected text. All right, and so the important part that I provided you, or you have been provided, a handout on the oracy development for English learners, the read aloud and story retell procedure. And so I wanted that all in slides, and but here is a beautiful handout, and I think it's much nicer than what I have, to tell you the truth. So I really like this handout. It's very pretty. But anyway, so as we look at this oracy development for English learners, and I also gave you an extra resource there so you can read in great detail about this procedure. So, it was very important for us to also provide a read aloud. By the way, we only allowed 5 minutes, so we used one book for the whole week, and we would just introduce the book and read a few pages. But what was beautiful about this is we also introduced, a few words that would be very important words to help them understand that passage. And so look at number 2 where it says selection of the vocabulary words. We had to make sure that those words were those words that would be very useful to the students. One of the things that we found as we were working in the English language is that our English learners, and you've heard of Tier 1 words, Tier 2, Tier 3, Dr. Isabel Beck and her colleagues from their work on vocabulary have, talked about Tier 1 words being basic, common, everyday words like table and chair. But one of the things that we found out very quickly in our research studies were that we also had to just address those basic words as well as the academic words, because a word as simple as chair has multiple meanings, and a simple word like run has like 20 meanings, right? And so we found out that we needed to work both on the basic words and the academic words. And now Dr. Beck and her colleagues in their new book talk about the work that we've done with English learners and about how we have to be mindful of those basic words as well as the academic words to make sure that they have deep understanding. And so you see there that we had the students, we had questions that really we had to think very seriously about which to choose our vocabulary words. And then the read aloud passages that we selected, we wanted to get them on at a higher level than their reading level, so making sure that they were above the student's grade level for their actual ability to decode. And we did it by thematic units because that seemed to work best to really help them gain deeper knowledge in one area of study. And so as we look at vocabulary instruction, and I've given you our reference for this and some of our research on this topic, is that for steps for explicit instruction, so here are some of the things we always make sure we did in our studies, and you can also read about these in those IES practice guides. Number 1, making sure that the students get to say the word, right, and also write the word. We want to make sure that the definitions that we give are definitions that are simple definitions. We call them the friendly definitions.
and that the students have opportunity to provide examples and non-examples, so we would get into discussions about what it was and what it was not. And as we get to engage with the students, we have selected activities and discussions around these words, creating multiple opportunities for them to actually use the word. So that was very, very important as we work with our students. And so as you look at the next slide, what you'll find is that very clearly, I want to give you some examples for the explicit instruction. Those examples being like a word like delicious and gigantic and content. So delicious meaning the familiar term, something that tastes very good. Gigantic meaning something or someone is very big. Or content meaning I'm very happy. So I say and write the word. We come up with some friendly definitions. And then we actually will have them have opportunities to figure out what they know about the word, providing both examples and non-examples. And so you'll see on the next slide that I give you a description of, and here's like, oh my God, see that non-example? That's the burnt toast that I do every morning. My husband tells me, you didn't make me brownies, you made me blackies. And the blackies are my brownies. And then I have a daughter-in-law who can make these delicious cupcakes. And so I'm very sad to tell you that the non-example is my example, and the example will be my daughter's-in-law. So here you see an example of gigantic, right, being that basketball player, and then comparison, a non-example being this little girl, or gigantic, big, fun beach ball versus the golf ball. In addition, another example, well, here this little girl looks content. So why would you say that she's content? She looks happy, she's satisfied, she's smiling. And the non-example, how do you know that she's not content? And what word might we use to describe that as a non-example? And then we engage in discussions. Do you think spinach is delicious? Why or why not? Do you think a turtle is gigantic? Why or why not? Do you think this girl is content? Can you explain why or why not? So this helps us to get more discussions built around these words. And we have to, I tell my students, 12 opportunities for use. That's my minimum. 12 opportunities for use to really know that word. Next slide. And so here are these bilingual glossaries. And so these are very evidence-based. And so in our studies, we made sure that the students had opportunity to create their glossaries, and so here are the words delicious, gigantic, and content, and then there are sentences that they created, plus they could draw their picture. I can't draw, so that won't be my picture. I would, use another picture, and then the word actually in their native language. These bilingual glossaries from our studies are evidence-based, and so very, very useful and practical for our English learners. And so we want to know, how do you know if an English learner knows the meaning of a vocabulary word that they use to create a sentence, and should you review vocabulary words after students, right? After the students are able to show you that they know the word. Why or why not? So I'll give you a minute or two to think and reflect upon that. So here in the audience, let me get some answers from some of our participants here as we wait for our chat pod.
There are two ways in which you can know whether or not a student has learned or acquired a word. One way is through conversation, and also when they write. When they write, that means that they have it, they own it. Also, you need to see the context, how it is used, because sometimes it may be wrong, and you have an opportunity to provide feedback when you review what they have written. And when they are pronouncing in a conversational setting, if there is a problem with pronunciation, you can also teach articulation. Sometimes they may know the words, but they are avoiding it because they may be afraid of how to say it, or they are insecure. So, two ways.
What I really like about her answer is that she embedded listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So by giving all those opportunities for listening, speaking, reading, and writing, that was giving these multiple opportunities to really, really understand and know if the student truly has mastery of these vocabulary words. And by doing that, you're doing that extra check and that extra opportunity. The other thing that we've learned from our research is this: you can't just go away from the words. Let me just tell you, the other thing that we learned in our studies is that we had to go back and reflect upon and reuse and continue adding to their repertoire of vocabulary. Even though they demonstrated mastery, we wanted to still, every couple of weeks, make sure that we had activities to make sure for extra opportunities for you.
The virtual participants, there are several responses, and essentially they said for the breadth and depth of the word, for retention and practice.
Very good. Well, I have certainly enjoyed this time that I've had with you today, and I thank the RAL for inviting me. And I hope that you have learned some about English learners and about helping them along that journey to become biliterate. Thank you very much.
Thank you.